a few years ago, I asked ChatGPT, how do you determine tax residency in South Africa? And I still use that version where I put it up on the screen and students are then invited to critique this. And then, of course, with students, it's very easy to be critical if it's not your own work. So they really go into this. And it is important that they can see that in this instance, AI is not able to cover all the theory or everything that's in the legislation. There are glaring mistakes. For instance, they only refer, the ChatGPT answer only refers to juristic persons and nothing about natural persons or trusts, for instance. So it is important to realize that, that's what I want my students to realize is AI is there, and I'm not saying we shouldn't use it, but you also need to be very confident in your knowledge. And you get confident in your knowledge by going to the primary legislation, because you should be critical when you engage with AI, because the answers AI gives you for tax specifically is not accurate.
A very good afternoon to all of our viewers. I am very privileged and fortunate to be speaking today with Professor Carika Keulder from WITS University. It's such a pleasure to have you here today, and I'm very much looking forward to a conversation both from a space of academia as well as practice that speaks about AI and the interpretation of tax law. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Delano. I'm very excited about this conversation today.
Professor, if I can ask, as a researcher, what are some of the fundamental things you try to instill for your tax students at WITS?
I think the most crucial thing is that you need to be able to interpret legislation. Thinking about my own research at the moment, it is sitting with the provisions of the Act and working through that to determine what is the meaning. So that's a very important skill that I try and instill in my students, is sitting with the Act. I know it feels easy to take the textbook, what they say, but it is important to realize that that's secondary sources. At the end of the day, you should be able to engage with the primary sources, because in tax, everything changes. There's legislative amendments every single year, and therefore it is an important skill to be able to interpret the legislation.
I fully agree with that. And I mean, one comment I can give is when I started off my career as a tax attorney, it was absolutely crucial that I was a holder of a professional handbook. And we've always been taught that, for instance, the Income Tax Act must be your starting point when dealing with a tax question. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And you know what, I see with students, it's not really nice. It's not nice to work through those sections if you can have someone who's explained it in easier terms. But you need to grapple with those sections specifically. So for me, even in academia, that is the starting point always, is sit with the piece of legislation.
And maybe just on that, I often find that when one re-engages with a specific section, maybe a year later, 2 years later, or even 5 years later, one actually arrives at often a different answer to what they initially had. Do you have perhaps any insight into a similar experience with your key provisions you look at for your students?
Yes, absolutely. I think let's say there's a new provision, initially you just deal with what is the core things that we pick up from that. But then later onwards, as taxpayers get more confident and they try to see loopholes, you really start to dissect different words in that provision. So I think initially, when you start out engaging with provisions, you look at what does it say? And then later on, which you're like, but what does it really say? So it's just, over time, you delve deeper into those provisions. So it does happen where initially you think of something, but then you see, or you think this is what it means. But then later you get a specific scenario in a case, and you're like, oh, we actually need to pay attention to what does during mean, or exceeding. We need to pay attention to those things. And then it changes a little bit in the meaning for you.
I think also what's so fascinating to see in practice is that a lot of our clients that approach us for tax advice, they already have a vague understanding of their situation, but it's remarkable to see that their primary sources is nowhere near the legislation itself. It's more what they've read in the market, what other expats are telling them, what their financial advisors are perhaps telling them. And you see these subtleties in how, for instance, banks, policy administrators, expats abroad have very differing views on what is the tax position here. And I think that's why a lot of clients come to us for that specific answer. Do you maybe have any views on that?
Yes, I see it with my students as well when I give them a research project where they need to engage with the primary legislation and they look at what is on all of these different platforms where it's not legal advice, it's just simply very broadly stating how the provisions apply. And then they want to rely on that. And then it takes them a while to realize they need to be confident in their skills as coming to be lawyers, to know exactly, let's go back to the primary legislation. So I think it is unfortunately, that there's a lot of coverage on tax, but it's not everyone that writes something on tax that's necessarily an expert. It's not necessarily that it's legal advice. It's just saying what the section says. It does not deal specifically with your scenario. I think that's where it becomes really important for students to be able to look at what does the law say and how does it apply to the specific set of facts? And I imagine that's the same way for tax consulting, where it becomes important that you're able to take the legislation and apply it for your client, not just in a general social media kind of way.
Absolutely. Maybe just to hone in on the relevance of AI specifically. So a lot of the clients I deal with are South African nationals who've gone abroad. Mm-hmm. And when they go abroad, their critical question to me is, will they still be viewed as a resident in South Africa for tax purposes? Now, maybe not to preempt the answer from your side, but can I perhaps ask, how would you approach that question as a researcher?
So if I can maybe just talk about how we deal with this in class. So in my undergraduate module, we have a specific scenario, or when the students work through the theory, of course, they need to engage with the legislation, and I provide them with recordings. And then they have to do like a mind map or an infographic, just setting out how do you determine tax residency in South Africa. And then we have this very interesting class exercise. A few years ago, I asked ChatGPT, how do you determine tax residency in South Africa? And I still use that version where I put it up on the screen and students are then invited to critique this. And then, of course, with students, it's very easy to be critical if it's not your own work. So they really go into this. And it is important that they can see that in this instance, AI is not able to cover all the theory or everything that's in the legislation. There are glaring mistakes. For instance, they only refer, the ChatGPT answer only refers to juristic persons and nothing about natural persons or trusts, for instance. So it is important to realize that, that's what I want my students to realize, is AI is there, and I'm not saying we shouldn't use it, but you also need to be very confident in your knowledge. And you get confident in your knowledge by going to the primary legislation, because you should be critical when you engage with AI, because the answers AI gives you for tax specifically is not accurate. So if I take that to my own research, in instances where I've asked AI to provide me with or to explain certain things, because I know and I've done the work, I can see, no, what you're saying here is not accurate, or the way that you're referring to this case, that's actually not what the principle in the case is. So I think in relation to tax and AI, that critical thinking still needs to be there. We cannot sit back and say, let AI decide for us or let AI tell us. We can ask AI, but then you need to be critical of what AI is saying. And the only way you can be critical is if you at least know the theory behind what you've asked.
Very valuable. I mean, one question that comes to mind is, and I'm not sure myself, I haven't tried asking AI if, for instance, based on a set of facts that are usually convoluted, does AI understand the hierarchy of our judicial system in South Africa? Do you think it's able to distinguish between a decision made by a court that's High Court, Supreme Court of Appeal, Constitutional Court, And how do you think that might influence its view on whether a client is tax resident or not?
So I must be honest, I haven't also tried it, so I don't know specifically how AI would deal with that. But just looking at how it deals with cases, specifically tax cases, there's quite a few instances where, some of my students would use AI thinking that I wouldn't pick it up, where they would state a case and then a principle. I'm like, yes, this is a tax case, but this is not what the case was about, and this is definitely not the principle. So I think even before we can look at does it understand the hierarchy, we would need to make sure, does AI understand the cases? Are they able to really dissect it and understand what is relevant for tax purposes? And at that stage, we are not there yet.
Very, very true on your side. I can also recall as a student, it takes a bit of skill to be able to read a judgment and really distill what was the principal decision in that specific case. And I'm not too sure if AI can simply just have access to all judicial decisions and be able to distill that very quickly in a scenario on what's applicable. And I am speaking very broadly because I think it's new territory. Mm-hmm. And as someone who's in practice with clients who are really interested in getting correct tax advice, I think it's encouraging, at least for students, to perhaps pursue the skill of interpretation while they can, because really you've got so much value, I think, to add to taxpayers who are looking to save tax with good tax advice. Not sure if there's anything you would like to mention around that.
No, I think it's absolutely the value of being able to interpret tax legislation and the principles in cases. It's invaluable. And I think that is what separates lawyers or people who've been trained in the legal field from other areas, is sitting down. And I always say to my master students, well, like, there's so many cases, and how do you work through this? The only way that you're able to do that is by doing it often and a lot. So that it's a consistent process to get that skill. And as I said, I don't think AI is there yet at all.
Very true. I think another thing I'm interested in, just to get your view, sometimes in tax, one has a theoretical answer, but you are confronted with giving a client a practical answer. And this practical answer usually relates to how will SARS's e-filing system accept the practical position? Mm-hmm. Do you maybe have any views on that? Is it something you talk to your students about?
Well, I think it is something that we need to be aware of. You can't divorce tax education and practice from each other. I think it's really important that we have that integration. And where in academic terms we focus on what is the theory, I think it is important to say to students, you know what, this is the theory, this is what the law says, but this is what would happen practically. So I think it is important where you are aware of in practice where there's a deviation or things that SARS accepts that's not necessarily in terms of legislation, that you do mention that to your students and they do understand how that comes into play and how that would come into play if we go to court dealing with these scenarios where the law says one thing but then practically something else occurred.
Maybe a throwaway question here. When I was very much interested in tax law at university, I always viewed SARS and the taxpayer as a David versus Goliath kind of analogy. Just broadly speaking, do you think that both taxpayers and SARS are eager to make use of AI with the tension of taxpayers wanting to save tax and SARS wanting to collect as much tax as possible?
So firstly, I do think that your feeling about the David and Goliath, it's very fitting, especially in my research field, dealing with tax administration and what is the powers of SARS and taxpayers' rights. So I think it is a very fitting way to see it. We've seen with SARS that they've invested quite heavily in the last few years in technological advancements and AI. So they are very keen, but I do think, and now this is me coming in as a researcher, I do think it is important when we work towards these implementing AI more efficiently, because it would ensure effective and efficient collection of taxes, that we also think about taxpayers' rights. So I'm thinking of the recent e-filing profile hacking that occurred. Well, not so recent. It's been going on for a few years, but it's really now in the media spotlight with the Tax Ombuds report on this, and the fact that it's been declared a systemic issue. And there it's important that, yes, SARS is very keen to use AI as much as they can, but they need to ensure that taxpayers' rights are protected. And then I think on the other side, taxpayers are very keen to use AI because that could result in them saving money, time, and maybe they feel that they might not need to get tax advice. But again, I think there needs to be caution to this approach because, as we said already in this podcast, I think there's still glaring issues with AI, and it's not able to fulfill the work that someone with a law background would be able to fulfill in tax.
I think you've nailed it on the head. I think your insights are incredibly valuable. I do want to thank you as well for taking a bit of your professional time to share these thoughts with us. And I'm very much looking forward to perhaps further conversations on this topic, because I think the landscape of tax, and specifically for our firm, expatriate tax, is ever evolving, ever more relevant to taxpayers, and ever more persistent in trying to find a balance on SARS collecting as much of what is rightfully due to them, but as you've critically mentioned, protecting taxpayers' rights and ensuring that their tax position is aligned to what are their rights. So Carika, thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Delano. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone from Tax Consulting South Africa and Professor Carika Keulder from WITS.